I want to welcome everybody to the fourth session of the 2023 Virtual Spring Organic Landscaping Series. We've had a great group of speakers so far. It started in March of 2023, and it went all through now on June 15th of 2023. We have a great speaker tonight, Chip Osborne. He is an organic landscaper, started out using regular conventional landscaping, and he has changed over the lands, public lands in Marblehead, and lived in Marblehead for 70 years until he recently moved up to Maine. But he is gracious enough to talk to us today. He's also on the board of Beyond Pesticides, which is a national organization out of Washington, D.C. So without further ado, Chip.
Well, thank you, Debbie. We're going to talk a little bit about what organic landscaping is. I know you've had others in the series and have addressed, the subject on what organic landscaping is, the cost of the different materials and inputs that might be used. You've heard from Dr. Sarah Evans about the health effects. You've heard about water and what happens in that situation with the use of synthetics. I'm a 50-year professional horticulturist. I spent 37 years in the commercial greenhouse industry. I've been working since 1997 in turf and landscape. And I spent 25 years of my career as a chemical pesticide applicator in the greenhouse industry. And the last 25 years have been all natural, all organic, developing organic strategies for turf in the landscape with a specialty in sports turf. Where is it happening? I know in Watertown, municipal lands are being managed without the use of synthetic chemicals. These are just a few of the projects that I'm currently involved in. And you can see there are cities and towns in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, New York City, Cambridge, large homeowner associations, Rancho Mission Viejo and Ladera Ranch in California, major cities like Tempe, Madison, Tucson, University of California, Berkeley. So all of these have gone through a process of educating both the municipality or the university staff and private citizens. What I get involved in is what I call an awareness through education. This informs people about what the products that are currently used in synthetic management are and how to successfully practice organic management when we walk away from those products. First thing we need to understand is we need to learn to embrace biodiversity. This is part of a very significant residential property, but it does not have to be highly managed turf grass everywhere on the property. All expectations do not have to be the same. We do not always have to have a monoculture or a non-native lawn of turf grass. And it's important to understand that all of the grass that's grown in New England is not native. Cemeteries, public parks, residential properties, our athletic fields, all are non-native. It's all grasses that came from Western Europe and the British Isles. So we have been taught to manage non-native grasses as a monoculture. Horticulturists understand that managing non-natives can be difficult. They also understand that managing monocultures can be difficult. So we're now learning to incorporate best management practices along with the overarching concept of embracing landscape diversity. So what are we moving away from and why are we doing it? We're looking to reduce and eliminate synthetic pesticides, reduce and eliminate synthetic fertilizers, which is just as important. Synthetic water-soluble fertilizers are simply salt, and salt is not conducive to a healthy biologically active soil, which is fundamentally at the basis of good horticultural programs and absolutely at the basis of an organic program. Synthetic fertilizers can damage waterways, both freshwater, saltwater, get into groundwater, and can infiltrate well water depending upon the depth. We're looking to reduce total inputs over time, not just synthetic, but organic as well. We're looking to build a resilient system that can function on its own. Why do we do this? We're looking to protect human and children's health, protect the environment, pollinators, protect our water. And the bottom line is we want turf and landscapes to get better and healthier. And in the vast majority of the projects I've been involved in over the last 25 years, the landscapes and grass in particular do get better and do get healthier when we remove synthetics from the equation. So let's take a little look before we start at pesticides. What do you know? How do you perceive pesticide use? Have you been told that they're safe when used as directed? That's actually a statement that is prohibited by federal law. Have you been told that they're no big deal? Or have you been told by applicators that they're safe when dry to the touch? Very common line that comes from the industry is that once these are sprayed and they dry, they're safe. But there's something called a half-life. The half-life is the length of time it takes for 1/2 of the pesticide active ingredient to be completely broken down by the sun and organisms. So we put little yellow flags out there that say keep off for 48 hours. Someone has told you that it's safe when it's dry to the touch, but what if that half-life is between 8 to 10 hours and 70 days? And that is the range for most lawn care chemicals. Let's take a quick look at the regulatory process. We have a law, FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. It was originally written in 1947 and housed within the USDA. It was revised in 1972, and at that time, the concept of risk assessment was incorporated into statute, and the US EPA was formed. It was revised in 1988, and the focus was simply on the registration of some of the older pesticides. So as we move forward, think about this, that all pesticides that are evaluated and tested and receive a pesticide registration number in 2023 are being done so on statute or based on statute that was written 50 years ago. So we have ancient legislation that founded science at that time, and they're still applying it in the modern age. So the amendments in 1972 required the EPA to assess potential risks that pesticides pose to humans, the environment, and wildlife. Weigh these risks against the pesticide benefit. If the benefit outweighs the risk, the pesticide comes to market. The EPA is charged with the responsibility of taking action against pesticides for which the risk outweighs the benefit. I've been fortunate enough over the last 10 or 15 years to be able to meet with the EPA in Washington on several occasions. And part of the benefit, believe it or not, they have told us, is that they believe they have an obligation to provide benefit to the registrant. That is the chemical company. Just some statements on pesticides. The active ingredient is generally a relatively small percentage of what's in the bag, box, or bottle. That's the portion of the product that's designed to kill the pest. The largest percentage is known as inert ingredients. We have no information on potential harm from inert ingredients. We don't know what those chemicals are that are in the largest percentage of the product. Those materials are often not tested. By law, they don't even need to be disclosed on the container. They are proprietary business information and protected by trade secret laws. This is a very important fact. The final bag, box, or bottle of a pesticide product has not been tested as it comes out of the container. This is the active ingredient combined with inerts, metabolites, and contaminants. And as part of the EPA registration process, this kind of testing does not apply. The testing is done on laboratory animals and extrapolated to the human population, 150-pound male, not an infant, woman, child, or toddler. There is no framework within risk assessment that looks at repeated low-dose exposures to children, or any sensitive part of the population. And that's what Sarah talked to you a few weeks ago about. That's her specialty, Dr. Sarah Evans. Her work is around the low dose exposures to children. Now, keep in mind that is not accounted for in the risk assessment model. Current research, like Sarah spoke about, strongly indicates that many of the products that the EPA regards as low risk at high doses have been found to be high risk at low doses. In other words, our children that get cumulative low dose exposures, or any sensitive member of the population, when weed and feed goes down in the backyard or on a playing field or on any other type of a situation. Just because a product carries that EPA registration does not mean that there can be an assumption of safety across the board. So these are all pesticides that are used in lawn care. They don't always stay where they're put. They can be moved by wind, water, blowers, transporting grass clippings into municipal compost and transferred to shoes and clothing and moved inside. A lot of you have probably heard of Roundup and the issues that have come forward in the last 5 or 6 years with it being declared a probable human carcinogen and the lawsuits around that. There's a little bit of misinformation about things like Roundup, because Roundup was touted as safe because as it translocated down through the plant, the active ingredient glyphosate was neutralized. So it was no longer harmful. And that's true. That's what happened. But what they don't tell you is that the breakdown products of glyphosate as a secondary and tertiary compound can be more toxic than what came out of the bottle. Glyphosate is also registered as an antibiotic. So we know that it compromises biological life in the soil, and research strongly indicates that it can compromise biological life in the human gut. Synthetic and organic pesticides are both designed to kill, repel, or mitigate a pest. No matter what the product, they both need to be taken seriously. Caution with organic product is just as important as it is with synthetic. And because we are managing without synthetics or in an organic program does not mean that we do not have pesticides, some US EPA registered and some exempt from registration, that we can use. The big difference between the two products is that synthetic pesticides are associated with long-term human health effects. There are a few of the organic active ingredients, if not used with caution, can give an acute response. Acetic acid or organic acids that are the non-selective weed killers, the alternative to Roundup. It's a strong vinegar, which is an acetic acid. And if you get it into your eyes, it's a problem. So caution has to be used. But the organic materials are generally not associated with long-term human health effects. Conventional land and turf grass management involves synthetic fertilizers, chemical pesticides. It's a quick fix approach. It's a product-centric approach. It often involves the prophylactic use of pesticides, which is happening right now. Synthetic grub control is going down now in June. Whether or not we know that we have a grub problem, just in case a beetle decides to lay eggs in the next month, that pesticide will kill those eggs. So without understanding whether we actually have a grub, we're using this front-loading the system. Preventative applications like crabgrass control are simply not even integrated pest management. It's a pesticide treadmill where the manufacturer wants you to put crabgrass pre-emergent down every year. We're doing that every year because that application lasts for one season, not always 100% effective, but it's treating a symptom, because crabgrass is a symptom in the lawn. It's not the underlying problem. The underlying problem is you just don't have enough grass growing there. Turf density is minimal. It might be extremely compacted. The pH, the relative acidity or alkalinity might be out of whack. Those are the underlying problems. So we are treating the symptom with the pesticide. Natural land management is natural organic product. Soil testing is the basis for our input. We're looking to choose product that gives us long-term benefit. We're not looking just for the immediate present, but we're looking to build soils for the future. Natural or organic does not treat symptoms, it solves problems. So back to that crabgrass model, if I want to solve that problem, I'm going to aerate, put some oxygen in the soil, loosen the soil, and I'm going to overseed with grass seed. Because as I create maximum thickness of that lawn, there will be nowhere for the crabgrass to grow, and we will eliminate it. It will not be eliminated in 3 or 4 weeks like it can be with chemicals, but it will be eliminated in 3 growing seasons, a spring, fall, spring, or a fall, spring, fall. And once we get it out of there, we've solved the problems, and it generally does not come back. The objective in a natural program is to create and establish a healthy soil. So we're talking about an alternative management protocol. You may have heard these words: natural, organic, sustainable, regenerative. Regenerative regarding soils is the new buzzword. Building soils, restoring health to soils. As we restore health to soils, we can sequester greater amounts of carbon. So one of the big things that natural management is doing is helping us to address the big picture of carbon sequestration. If we are truly managing in an organic program, we are regenerative. So a lot of the work that I do now ties into cities' carbon sequestration plans and looking to build healthy, biologically active soil and healthy turf grass, healthy plant material to sequester greater amounts of carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide goes right through the leaves of trees, the blades of grass, and gets absorbed and in through the process of photosynthesis, turns into carbohydrate. And 80% of that carbohydrate goes down in the root. And that's where carbon sequestration happens. We're talking about the adoption of a systems-based approach versus product. Think of the 4-step program. That is a product approach based on the calendar date. We are not engaging in a product swap. We're not looking to get rid of chemicals that are considered undesirable and choose a better one, or a fertilizer that's undesirable and choose a better one. We're looking to manage in a completely different way. Systems-based approach is the marriage of 3 individual concepts: a basic understanding of soil biological life. There are organisms under that grass. Those organisms are responsible for completing the underground portion of the nitrogen cycle. They are fundamentally responsible for delivering nutrition to all plant material. It's not first by accident, it's first because it is the most important. Second is what I call revised horticultural practices. This is things like aeration and the right way to water and the use of grass seed. The cultural practices very often have been put to the background because synthetic fertilizers and chemical pesticides have the distinct ability to override the absence of cultural practices. So it's most important that we develop programs based around cultural practices. Cultural practices have a labor cost associated with them, but there is no product cost generally associated other than purchasing grass seed if that's one of the cultural practices we employ. And the third part, because we do use product, but we are very judicious in our product use and typically don't use as much as we do as would be done in a conventional program. So the exclusive use of natural organic products, because those products, if they are fertility products, will not only stimulate the grass or the ornamental bed, whatever the plant material may be, it will also build and develop soil biological life. American homeowners, homeowner associations, corporate campuses, all use more pesticides, as much or more, than all of conventional agriculture combined. So think about that. Turf around residential, corporate campuses, colleges, cemeteries, whatever that may be, more pesticide use than agriculture. Turf grass is the largest irrigated crop in the United States. Part of what we talk about in an organic program is the 35% reduction in applied water at the end of 4 years or so. So if we do things properly, we're going to save water down the road. Awareness through education, as I mentioned before, is a process or is a concept that I've developed that I work with homeowners, turf managers, and land managers and landscape contractors. Turf managers, landscape contractors, facilities directors, those that are responsible for maintaining corporate campuses. I think one of the more widespread thoughts that I have, or holding back a more widespread adoption of organic lawn and turf practices, is limited by the lack of education in the proper protocols and procedures. I think there's an inherent fear of failure. There really is nothing that's going to fail. The worst case scenario is if you did it improperly and weeds came in, you could go back to a conventional product and get rid of all the weeds, but you're not going to destroy the grass. It's not going to break the budget. We'll talk about that as we get a little further into the PowerPoint and what the actual cost reflect, but it is the professionals' fear of failure because they don't understand it. So just as education was needed to embark on a conventional approach, education is also needed to understand and implement an organic approach. Because we're not simply swapping out product, we're learning different concepts to turf management, and getting the right education is the success that it, or will guarantee the success in whatever project we're working on. In my opinion, there's too much grass in the world. We're very guilty of putting grass where it doesn't belong. I can tell you stories about building new school construction, new residential construction, condo development. And when landscape architects often have a question on what to put somewhere, they put grass. Think about a big paved parking lot at a school, and then a beautiful athletic field right behind the school. Next to the athletic field, we have an asphalt sidewalk. Then a landscape architect drew a pretty picture and put a 4-foot strip of grass, and then the hot parking lot. That 4-foot strip of grass became weeds within the first year. So grass never belonged there. Some grass should go away, some must stay. There should be a general change in a perception of what is appropriate. Non-chemical management of the entire landscape improves everything that we've talked about. So as some goes away, some grass goes away, we need to keep our parks. We need to keep our athletic fields, golf courses, a reasonable amount of grass around a residential property. I had a client that had 85,000 square feet of turf grass around her estate. And she only walked it twice a year with me, but she would never get rid of any of it. And I finally, on my own, went in over a period of 5 or 6 months and took out about 10,000 square feet of her lawn and allowed the woodlands to come into her property. She never knew I did it. When we walked out there, she said, "What's different? It looks great." So it's a matter of getting those big expanses of monoculture grass out of our mind. It can be done on any scale. Large residential on the left. The picture you see there on the right is a 22-year model of organic lawn care or natural turf management on, excuse me, on an athletic field in Marblehead. We have residential on the left and residential on the right, so we can do it at any level or any scale. It doesn't happen overnight. We call it a transition period because the products we're using and the practices are not quick fix, instant gratification. We have to invest some time into it. So when I work with a client, I'm not directly a landscape contractor that goes and works on property. I'm a consultant. And I teach landscape contractors. I design turf management programs, and I design programs of cultural practices that are implemented by others. What you see here is at the end of a 2-year transition. You'll see in a few more slides what that looked like before we started. So during the transition period, specific cultural practices are adopted, new products are understood and applied, and the most important element of a transition is the attention to the soil. If we simply go and start to put product down without having a soil test to tell us if we're in the right place or not, we minimize our chances for success. We address the subject of expectation. Everybody has a different expectation on what they would like to see for their landscape. Expectations may be low, medium, or high. You can see public parks, residential, public space, lower right. Cultural intensity is product. It's labor, it's water, it's the total of all the resources needed to meet different levels of expectation. So a high expectation would be met with high cultural intensity. A lower expectation may be met with lower expectation. All that being said, low expectations are not always bad, and higher expectations are not always good. It's the appropriate expectation for the site that becomes the guideline. These next two statements are true whether we're dealing with a chemical program or an organic program. Lower levels of expectations can be met with lower cultural intensity. That translates to a lower cost per 1,000 square feet. Higher levels of expectations can be met with higher cultural intensity, and that will translate to a higher cost for that 1,000 square feet. So it's expectations determines what we do. So go back to that picture of the 4-step program. If you put down all 4 bags, you will get a higher expectation, or the higher expectation that that product could provide for you. If you only put down 2 of those 4 bags, you will get a very different expectation. So our first step is site and soil analysis. This is where we begin. We embark on soil testing. In all of my projects, I do all of those tests over on the right. Soil chemistry, which is the typical test that you would get at the University of Massachusetts, gives us the nutrients, the organic matter fraction, the pH, the relative acidity or alkalinity, the nutrient retention capability of the soil. That test is one that should be done before we embark on a turf management program with a property of any size or significance. Ideally, it should be done on all grass areas. The most important thing to address up front is the pH, because we know that turf grass thrives in a pH between 6.5 and 7.0, just under neutral. But in New England, we tend to have acidic soils. So if we have a pH in the 5s or low 6s, the grass can't get all the nutrients that it needs, even if we apply them. So the information that is given us on this $25 or $30 test is critically important. The next test, soil texture, gives us the sand, silt, and clay. Not necessarily done on all residential properties, but if we had a corporate campus or if we had new construction, very often soils that are used in new construction are less than optimum, less than the best quality. So testing for soil texture helps us understand if we are beginning with a soil that has limitation. And then a test that's relatively expensive and certainly not done on residential properties, but I do in my projects, is the soil actually goes under a microscope. And we're looking at the organisms in the soil, how they interact, and what we may need to do to improve the efficiency of their activity. And that is the soil biology. It's collectively known as the soil food web and is at the heart of all sustainable soils. Conventional agriculture and conventional landscape practices have significantly disrupted the soil food web. Many of the agricultural soils in the Midwest are void of biological life and are being managed strictly with chemical pesticides and chemical fertilizers, and the natural processes that nature have put in place have been taken away. Through organic and regenerative means, we are looking to restore those soils. Soil food web was coined a number of years ago to describe the relationship between all the microbes. The organisms are responsible for the creation and maintenance of soil structure, how water drains, how much oxygen can be held in the soil, how well it can support the plant growth, plant nutrition, disease resistance. In an organic program, you rarely need to even consider a fungicide. The availability of mineral nutrients, all of this is controlled and governed by the microbial fraction. We are now going to think about looking beyond nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Conventional wisdom, conventional agriculture, and conventional lawn care has us only focusing on nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Moving forward, it is absolutely imperative that we put soil biological life on even footing with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. We actually have soil tests now where we can have one soil test that will look at both aspects, soil chemistry, nutrients, and biological life, and understanding the benefits to the soil, which comes from the NPK and which comes from the biological life, and how do we balance and integrate that? We want to think about less is more. Even if you have an organic fertility product that may cost more than a chemical fertilizer product, we know that we are going to use less over time as the system builds itself to greater health and resiliency. So costs will decline over time because we use less product in the future. That being said, with the petroleum market the way that it is, costs have risen between 30 and 40% on chemical fertilizers and have not risen that much with organic fertilizers. So there's a much greater cost parity now between the two products. We need to embrace the concept of nutrient cycling, where one organism consumes another one, and the resulting release is nitrogen to the plant. With regular high rates of fertilizer inputs, microbes get lazy and they don't work. So our focus is to put only what is needed and no more. On the right here, you can see products that say lawn food, rose food, flower food. I can assure you that that word food is strictly marketing. There is no food for any plant in any of those packages. If you think back to a biology class that you may have had at some point in your life, you have heard the word photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the biological process where the food for the plant is made. We have green in the leaf of the blade of grass. So when we apply fertilizer or nitrogen to soils, the grass it does many things. It grows blades in the spring, roots in the fall. It thickens itself sideways all year long, which is our natural weed control. And it gets green and moisture, carbon dioxide to enter into the grass blade. Chemical reaction happens and carbohydrate is one of the byproducts that is produced. And as I mentioned, most of that carbohydrate goes into the root system, and that is what the plant is fed on. The carbohydrates that are retained in the upper half, along with sugars and amino acids, are the foods. So fertilizers are catalysts, and the plant makes its own food. 3 kinds of fertilizers: organic, organic-based, and synthetic. Synthetic is a process that takes 5 tons of petrochemical to make 1 ton of fertilizer. Production consumes fossil fuels, releases greenhouse gases, disturbs the soil ecosystem. It's high salt, upsets soil balance, and leaches, does not stay where it's put. Organic-based is some organic fertilizer, but the balance of it is biosolid compost, which is sewerage sludge. Sewerage sludge contains heavy metals. Sewerage sludge contains residual pharmaceuticals, birth control, chemotherapy, growth hormones, steroids. All things that pass through our waste stream end up being bound into this solid product. Or urea, which is a synthetic fertilizer. So organic-based fertilizers are typically ones that you would stay away from. Anytime you see the word organic-based, you know that that is marketing to you some form of synthetic. Organic fertilizers are the ones that we want. Minerals, grains, plants, animal byproducts all make up organic fertilizers and provide natural sources of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Conventional fertilizer, as I mentioned, is urea, synthetic, inorganic, water-soluble, fast-release, petroleum-based, directly feeds the plant. Can work in as quickly as 2 or 3 days. Maximum nitrogen release is 7 to 10 days later, and in 4 to 6 weeks, it's all gone. So it's quick in, quick out. Natural organic fertilizer is water-insoluble nitrogen. Water does not break it down and release it. Microbes do. Naturally slow release. It feeds the soil, and the soil feeds the plant. Works slowly, steadily, supports the biomass, and is readily available in the soil for extended periods of time. In the eastern New Massachusetts area, if we are fertilizing with organic fertilizer, we have 4 windows that we can use: mid to late April, mid-June, mid to late August, late September to early October. During year 1 and 2, we might keep on a schedule like that. I'm an advocate of low dose fertility, not the higher doses that are recommended on most product labels. I prefer to put down smaller amounts at more frequent intervals, following the concept that less is more, and the frequent applications keep a slow, steady supply of available food for microbes being introduced into the turf system. Anytime we can use compost in any of our properties, it can take the place of a fertilizer application. It helps to build soils, introduces biological life and organic matter. It has some nutrient associated with it. Not as much nitrogen as you would find in fertilizer, but nitrogen that through organic matter can build soils for the longer term. We're spreading it 1/4 of an inch thick on the lawn. This is done best when it follows an aeration, and then we overseed directly into the compost. This can change a lawn in as little as 30 days. If we do this properly, the best time to do this is the end of August, early September. And if we decided to do a process on our lawn at that time, by Halloween, you'd have a whole new lawn without the use of chemicals. Compost tea is a liquid extract of a high-grade compost. 100 gallons of a compost tea is going to have the same number of organisms as 2,000 pounds of compost. This isn't readily available through all landscape contractors, but more and more are understanding the benefits of this material, and it's extremely low cost. It is not an expensive product to make. It's one that it is made in a machine like that and has a very favorable cost associated with it. We have our cultural practices, proper mowing. 3 inches is the ideal stress-free height. Every university that has a turf school will tell you that 3 inches is the ideal stress-free height for managing grass. So we're trying to get away from that close cropped golf course look into a more thick and lush lawn. We're adopting proper watering practices. Right now in the spring, if you have an irrigation system, it should only be on twice a week, but not just for 15 minutes because we want deep, thorough watering. We're looking to deliver 1 inch of water a week, a ½ an inch at each irrigation. In July and August, when it gets hot, we can move it up to 3 times a week and maybe deliver 1.5 inches of water. Compaction and aeration is a common situation with turf grass. Compaction is simply squeezing out all the oxygen spaces that are in soil. Soil science tells us that all soil particles should be surrounded on all sides by pockets of air that contain oxygen. And that oxygen is critical for the grass root, and that oxygen is critical to support the microbial life. Aeration opens holes in the lawn to introduce oxygen and restore the lawn to health. You wouldn't think so, but if you run an aerator like that over a lawn, you can physically see the benefits in a couple of weeks with that infusion of oxygen. And then embracing overseeding. Some organic landscapers or organic people will tell you you have to overseed all the time. I don't really hold to that practice. I think that you need to overseed aggressively, for the first 2 years. You want to seed in the spring to fill bare spots or thicken the turf before weeds get a chance to develop. And then you want to overseed again at the end of August, which is the ideal time to seed. And you'll do a general overseeding of the lawn. Repeat this for 2 years. You will then have turf density thick enough to suppress and choke out most weed populations. The 3-inch height of cut shades out crabgrass seed, so it cannot get the light it needs to germinate and become an issue. And the dense turf will choke out dandelions. Turf grass is a thug. It's more powerful than a dandelion. So thick, aggressive turf will choke out many broadleaf weeds. In the Northeast here, we have grasses that I mentioned that are non-native. We have Kentucky bluegrass, perennial ryegrass, tall fescue, and fine fescue. The ideal soil temperature for our grasses is 55 to 65 degrees. The ideal air temperature is 65 to 70 degrees. Genetics govern how grass grows. In the spring, you get aggressive blade growth on the top and minimal root growth. In the fall, you get minimal top growth and very aggressive root growth. And you can't change that. That's just the genetics of the grass plant. But let's look at those temperatures. Think about a day in Watertown in July or August when it's 89, 90, 92 degrees. If we have compacted soil in our lawn, that soil temperature is easily going to get into the mid and upper 80s. So we can be 25 or 30 degrees soil temperature higher than what the grass wants. So the grass is going to struggle in the best of circumstances. Same thing with air temperature, 65 to 75 degree air temperature, and when it gets to be 90. So these grasses came from Western Europe and the British Isles. Think about England, think about what you know about the British Isles and the weather. No real temperature extremes either way. It's more moderate than we are. And it's moist and damp most of the time. That's what bluegrass, ryegrass, and fescue want to have. but we can't always give that. So very often when we get weed populations pop up in the summer, it's because those weeds can tolerate the high temperatures better than turf grass. Oh, sorry. So let's talk about our expectations for the landscape and how we look at it. It's important that we remember that we understand, and people don't really think about this, but the expectation that we have for our lawns in 2023 was created by an industry, the chemical industry, in the 1950s to sell product. Prior to the Second World War, when a lot of these products were developed as a result of chemical warfare research, white clover was part of every grass seed mix because clover is a legume and fixes atmospheric nitrogen. It was a beneficial. We didn't need fertilizer. We recycled our grass clippings, which we should always do. And as they break down, they give the equivalent of a fertilizer application. When we have clover in the lawn, that's the equivalent of another fertilizer application. The industry came along and branded clover as a weed, as a bad guy. And they had a product that would kill the weed and not hurt the grass. But now we just lost a fertilizer application, but they had developed a chemical fertilizer that they're happy to sell us to give us the nitrogen that we lost. We have to remember that lawns are not agriculture. We do want lawns to be aesthetically pleasing, but we have to really stand back and take a look and say, do they actually need to be a 100% monoculture 100% of the time of non-native species? And the answer to that is probably no. In an organic lawn care program, my benchmark for successful and higher expectation is less than 5% weed pressures over an acre. And most of the time we can manage down to 2 or 3%. So 2 or 3% other species than turf grass in an acre of lawn is really not a very weedy look. Native plantings in the landscape should absolutely be the focus in the future. Native plant material rarely needs synthetic intervention. So does clover have a place in a lawn? I have clients where we have been requested to develop programs to introduce clover. We have a way of introducing it, a way of getting it in at the proper amounts. It needs to go in a very small percentage, usually 2 or 3% of a seed mix. So a little bit goes a long way. It not only provides nitrogen for the grass, but it provides food for pollinators. And everything we're doing in the landscape now is trying to create spots in our landscape that are pollinator friendly. I call turf grass weeds misplaced plants. They can be any one of these: plantain, crabgrass, quackgrass, dandelion, violets, ground ivy. Those are the common weeds that people in the Northeast deal with. In an organic program, it's true. There is no affordable, effective, organic, pre-emergent control product for crabgrass. But when you use a pre-emergent, you can't use grass seed because it inhibits the grass seed. So by following a proactive approach of introducing grass seed in an organic program, and I think with landscape contractors, one of the things they get caught up in is that they can't use, they don't have the pre-emergent to use. But my pre-emergent is a good bag of grass seed, and it absolutely will do the job. We just need to invest those growing seasons into it. We have limited selective herbicide, meaning kill the weed and not hurt the grass, but we do have some. And we do have Roundup alternatives, organic products that are non-selective that kill all vegetation. But again, the most effective weed management program is a program based on grass seed and cultural practices. I want to call your attention to these pictures here. On the top, this is an organic, a lawn has been organic for 4 years. The light color was representative of early spring seedings that has come in. And on this property, we have, the lawn there, that garden in the back, right in the middle there. I guess it's in the garden, so it's a weed, but you know what that is? That's actually Kentucky bluegrass. That's part of the lawn. So if it was immersed in the lawn up there, it would be a good guy. Now it has escaped and it's gotten into the garden area, so now that's a bad guy. Now look at the bottom, look at that beautiful stand of Johnny Jump Ups that's self-sowed from just 2 little 4-inch pots last year. And on the right, look at that little Johnny Jump Up that escaped and found its little home at the edge of the cobblestones, where it's now a weed. So on the left, it's a desirable plant. On the right, it's a weed. So now we're looking at changing our perception of what's good and what is bad. So let's look at the cost. My last couple slides here. You've probably heard it's too expensive. If we approach natural management as a product swap, it absolutely will be expensive. So if we're just saying we bought this much synthetic fertilizer and we're going to swap it and buy the same amount of organic fertilizer, it will be expensive because that's not the way that we do it. We choose our organic fertilizer. We're typically using less organic fertilizer because it lasts for a much longer time. The continued use of synthetic water-soluble fertilizers in an organic program contributes to cost inefficiency. A lot of contractors don't use pesticides, but continue to use the lesser expensive synthetic fertilizers, and they're actually doing an injustice because the system will never improve. It is the building of the microbial community, building the healthy soil, the use of organic fertilizers and soil amendments that make the difference. If it's done correctly, we build the system over time and costs decrease. We showed this with the National Park Service, where we did a trial site at President and Mrs. Hoover's grave site out in Iowa. And at the end of year 2, we reduced the program and we reduced cost by 35%. And by year 3, we maintained the same expectation. The cost of synthetic remains the same. What we do today, we do at the same rate and level into the future. The absence of synthetics does not cause economic injury to service providers. It's simply a reorientation of education. The organic land care practitioners that I know are highly profitable. I have a colleague in New Jersey that grew his business. He works on residential turf and athletic fields from 700,000 to 2.6 million. All organic, no synthetic. Here's what a chemical-free renovation looks like. Top left, 80% weeds and crabgrass. Dethatched, pull the material out of there, aerated, top dressed with compost, overseeded, and there is the end result on the bottom in 2 years. All of that was done without chemicals. How do you talk to your landscape company? Whether you're a residential, corporate campus, university, we look at the different kinds of companies. Lawn care companies are those that provide product applications. Fertilizer, pest control, along with some cultural practices. Lawn maintenance companies, their primary focus is cutting grass and doing general work around the yard, including yard cleanup. Some lawn maintenance companies also apply fertilizers. Then we have landscape design and installation companies that may maintain the landscape after installation. So when talking to a landscape company, it's communicating that you want an organic or a chemical-free program and pushing back when they say it doesn't work or it's too expensive. So where do we start? Abandon a fear of failure. Be willing to try a different approach to learn. Reorient your education and understanding of the landscape. Start to think about what is happening under your feet. Soil testing, determining expectations, understanding the landscape, exclusive organic input, and good horticultural practices. Everything you see here is organic. I do the close-up on the top left and top right to show that it's not long distance photography where all things always look good. This is density where weed populations in those two lawns are less than 1%. And it was not an expensive program to implement. Athletic field that's been organic since construction in 2006. And then large residential bottom left and right. So I think for me, this is the biggest reason why I got into this 25 years ago. I didn't wake up just one day and decide that organic lawn care, organic landscape management would be a good thing to do. But there's very real reasons why I have focused the last 25 years on developing successful natural approaches. Debbie, let me turn it back to you.
Thank you, Chip. You were wonderful. Chip, why don't you talk very briefly about how you got into this? You want to talk about the dogs that you had?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I was a commercial greenhouse operator, owner operator in Marblehead for 37 years. And I started in the early 1970s. And everything I was taught by university and cooperative extension was an all chemical approach. And I saw things come on the market in 74 or 5 that by 78 and 9 were gone because they were so toxic. One of the fungicides was no big deal. You know, we got it on our hands. The hands got stained yellow. You know, it wore off in a couple of days, but it wasn't supposed to be really harmful. 1979, it became number 3 on the list of known human carcinogens. They found this all out after it was out in the field. So I used this liberally in my greenhouse, and I used to breed English Springer Spaniels, and they stayed with me all the 24/7, and they were in my greenhouse. They used to sleep underneath the benches where this stuff all dripped down. And I lost them, a mother-daughter. I lost them both at 10 years old, a little younger, with their stomachs just covered in tumors. And it was a direct result of my practices, in the greenhouse. Now, granted, when using products out in the environment, they are, not as concentrated as what I was using. But as Sarah talked to you about a little while ago, it's the low dose exposure that we worry about now. It's not that strong dose. So that opened my eyes. That began to, I used to go from making my pesticide applications with a baseball hat and sunglasses and a little respirator to a full body suit with airflow and the whole thing, because as I learned more and more, I realized it was some pretty dangerous stuff. I used to have my blood tested every 3 years to make sure the cholinesterase levels weren't being compromised. So that's what led me, in 1997 to turn my back on that and focus on trying to develop safer alternatives. And at that same time, 1998, I moved my focus from the greenhouse out into turf and landscape.
Great. All right, we have some community leaders that are going to be talking to us also. And Judy, do you want to put your camera on first?
Sure. So my name's Judy Fallows, and I'm actually the coordinator for the school gardens in the Watertown Public Schools. I've been doing that since 2015. And since 2010, I've been part of the Watertown Community Gardens nonprofit here. We formed initially to manage community gardens in the community. There was an interest that came out of a poll from the community saying that we wanted to have more green space. People would love to see community gardens, and they would love to see a farmer's market. We have the farmer's market. We're starting to prioritize green spaces in Watertown through the comprehensive plan and open space, and we are also, you also need to understand that Watertown is now using organic practices only in their landscaping. The lawns are don't have any chemical fertilizer. We're not using any pesticides there. Our community gardens don't use pesticides or concentrated chemical fertilizer. We don't use only compost and some organic fertilizers and soil amendments. And the community gardens that we manage, we lost a couple of spaces due to our memorandum of understanding ran out with Mount Auburn Cemetery. There's fields now for BB&N where we used to have a community garden. We're looking for more space, but we've also branched out into planting more pollinator gardens with native perennials. And to do that, we're working with the Friends of Bees, the Watertown Citizens Working Group called Friends of Bees, which is very active in pollinator pathways. Now, and the group that, the name that we've come up with this collaboration is Watertown Pollinator Pathways. We're about to put out some signs, but we're running volunteer days so that people can come and work with us in these gardens. And we also have some educational opportunities. You can find those on the Watertown Community Gardens website under events. And the reasons that we're trying to promote this kind of gardening in Watertown is because Watertown's got very little green space. There's very little places for what were native birds and insects to grow and flourish. And the plants that are native local birds and insects evolved with are being replaced by non-native ornamental perennials that don't serve the needs of our pollinators as well. So we're kind of losing what little bits of ecosystem we have. And the Pollinator Pathways group is sort of trying to build that back. Let me give you one example. Over by the Hosmer School, they got a grant for traffic calming. So they built these bump outs into the street. You tell me how much time I have, because I don't know.
Go ahead.
And they were planted by the Mass Department of Transportation, but and they were planted with native perennials, and they had bushes and even some trees, small trees, and they planted those. But when the contract was up with the Department of Transportation, somebody needed to be maintaining those bump outs. So they reached out to Watertown Community Gardens, and we said, sure, we would love to help with that. So we've been doing a couple of work days a year to do the weeding out of the weeding out of the plants that would otherwise take over. So we have space for the native perennials to take hold. Some of them are annuals. And we also are working with the Department of Public Works. We put a garden in with plants and materials that were provided by DPW. Bob DeRico at DPW is just a wonderful advocate for this kind of planting. And so we planted a garden over there, and we're about to build a little retaining wall and add in some more perennials as we go along, trying to promote that garden to grow and not be full of weeds. Because one of the problems is gardens get full of weeds if they're not managed properly. And so mowing a lawn is easy, but taking care of a garden really takes some expertise. And to really build a nice garden, you have to do that over a number of years. So we're trying to promote little bits of ecosystem, green space, especially in areas where there isn't as much green space. This is another goal of the Watertown DPW, the tree warden. They're all kind of working together to make green space more accessible in areas where it's less available. This is not only important for the local ecosystem, but it's also important for human health. I mean, humans are part of the natural environment. And in order for us to really flourish, we need a natural environment in which to live. And folks who live in apartments or who live in places that are more crowded and dense and they don't have access to green space, these public parks and gardens are increasingly important for the life of the community and the health of the community. So let me see, what else did Linda want me to say? So what you can do is, oh, I see. So the last thing I'm supposed to say is, we will be having a table at the farmers market and fair on the square. And we'll be working with Friends of Bees because they're tabling too. We would love to talk to anybody who's interested in learning more by doing hands-on activities and educational opportunities. If you get on our newsletter, we're doing that every couple of weeks or a month. So anybody in the public is welcome to join. Doesn't cost anything. Well, some of the workshops maybe will cost something. But please come and talk to us if you see us at the farmers market or fair on the square, and keep your eyes open. If you'd like to join our mailing list, that's free. You just go to our website and click on the join our mailing list. And if you're interested in community garden plot, when you join the mailing list, you can just click that you're interested and you'll be on our waiting list.
Judy, why don't you put the information in the chat?
Sure.
So people are interested. Also, I just wanted to say that we had invited Pam Phillips from Friends of the Bees from Watertown Citizens of Peace, Justice, and the Environment to join us tonight, but she was unable to join us. But she wanted me to share that reducing pesticides use is important for pollinators. So, she was hoping to attend the series. But I will put in the link about what they're doing for Friends of the Bees so people can contact them if anybody is interested. And the last community leader is Nick. Do you want to put your camera on and talk about? Nick is doing the organization essentially, or a co-op called the Charles River Co-op. When Russo's closed during the pandemic, all of us felt a gap in our lives, I think. And so Nick has been working very hard with his board and to participate and in trying to get another Russo's, essentially, called the Charles River Co-op. Do you want to share what you're doing?
Sure. Hey, folks. My name is Nick Caranto. I'm the president of the Charles River Food Co-op. I've a bunch of topics to cover. We're going to just talk about what we are, where we are today, and what we're doing. I think I'll skip this board and volunteering section. This was a slide deck for our open house. I will happily talk to people about volunteering or being on the board, but just wanted to advertise who we are, what we're doing. First off, what is a food co-op? We were established in March 2022, really in response to Russo's closing and the lack of a community-owned grocery store here in Watertown or in the surrounding towns. We are a hybrid community and worker-owned store. So that means the folks that shop there and the people that will work at the store will both have an opportunity to own a piece of the store. And we are an actual real registered cooperative in Massachusetts. So we are like the closest thing to democracy in action you can get. I could talk as well for an hour about how interesting cooperatives are and how they're just a really great model that I don't think is well known or used, and it really does make community happen. So basically, why, as Debbie alluded to, we really do miss Russo's, but in reality, there's not a lot of community-owned options for grocery stores in Eastern Mass. In fact, this map on the right side of the screen is like where community-owned stores are in Massachusetts and the surrounding states, and you can see there's a pretty huge blank spot. The green pegs are startup stores. 2 out of the 3 are becoming very real. One in Maynard is just opened last month. In Dorchester, they might be opening in July. And those stores had both been organizing for 10 years. I would love to have a community-owned option in quicker time than that. And of course, there's lots of food co-ops out in Western Mass, up in Vermont and New Hampshire. But this is a model that I feel like we could do a little better than continuing to throw money towards billionaires that are sending themselves or others to space for food. I think we could do better than that and give our local economy a boost by keeping the money here and not giving it to, giant corporations that are overseas somewhere. So yeah, that's kind of the mission, is like we want to provide a market that features fresh produce. I don't think we can recreate the store that our community lost exactly, but heck, I think we can do a pretty dang good job getting kind of there. And we're really committed to having a fair and equitable working environment and really building the local food system. I think there's so much that we can learn as a community about where our food comes from, how it's grown, the producer side of it, how it gets to us, and like you don't get to think a lot of that and just walk into the bigger stores. And I think this is a huge opportunity for us to really be a stronger community. So I wanted to also just iterate, like, our goal is the store. There's a lot of options in our community for community supported agriculture, CSAs. There's a lot of delivery box services that will bring local farms food, be it veggies, meat, etc., to your door. I think there's lots of that. There's not a store, though, an actual physical place. That's really what we want to do. There's also a lot of farmers markets. It was the first week for the Watertown Farmers Market this week. Waltham has a great farmers market. There's several, the Newton ones are great too. Like, also that is an option. So that's not a problem we have. I think what we do need is a real place store. Where are we? We are in this, there's a model that we're following that's done by the Food Co-op Initiative. It's a national group that helps out groups all over the country. They have this like model of development, and we are at stage 2A. So we are just really starting down this road of what is truly a like volunteer-led effort to build a like physical place. This year we are holding our first annual meeting and like getting our real elections down. So the board's really doing a lot of that. We're also starting a market study to figure out where we can put the store. We sadly can't put it exactly where Russo's was because they're building labs. A thing that they keep trying to do here in Watertown. But we are like trying to figure out where we can put it, and that probably somewhere in Newton, Waltham, or Watertown. And how you get involved with about an opinion about where to put that is to be involved with us as we're building it. So we'll be doing a site search and a market study pretty dang soon as well.
And is your plan to have some organic produce in the store like Bruce did?
I really think so. It's hard for me to imagine a store with a co-op without organic produce. I think taking a page from what I've seen at other food co-ops, I've toured at least a dozen over the past year. And by tour, I mean I've just gone into them. I think nowadays you see a big mix between conventional and organic, and I think the product mix that Russo's had will be very hard to reproduce. It was literally all in his head, and they would just like call places to order them. But I know the organic piece was really important to the community, so it's hard for me to imagine. So yeah, I think I already said we're going to be somewhere in Newton, Waltham, Watertown, and you don't have to work in the store. We've gotten that a lot of questions around that. Typically stores don't have that kind of model anymore, and we will have consumer and worker shares. So like the people that actually are employed there can be owners. How to join? You go to charlesriverfood.coop/join. It's $200 for a one-time payment, or $25 over 8 months. That is your equity share into the store. So that helps fund our development. So that's how we pay for the studies, how we're going to pay to be at events like Riverfest this weekend in Waltham. And you can also gift memberships to a friend, and we're looking into like a solidarity share for our lower income residents in our community to figure out how to offset the costs of theirs. And yes, and to say to Kathy, plastics reduction, totally on board. Would love to see a bulk section and some kind of bring your own container type stuff.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
How many members are you up to now?
We are at 700 members.
Great.
That is not pretty unprecedented as well for a co-op that's only a year old. So thanks to everybody, including yourself, who has been a member.
Thank you very much, Nick. All right, Chip, you've got some questions.
Okay,
I'm going to thank the community leaders. Thank you so much for talking. So this is from Christine Gorman. She wants to know, she said that she applauds your work. She really wants to know if you've done any projects in Southern California in the past few years. Our climate here is quite different from Massachusetts, and the types of turf grass that do well in our climate is a factor that she's interested in, specifically in reference to soccer fields with heavy use. She's aware of a pilot project that you worked on. You supervised at a school in Irving many years ago, but she doesn't know how that has evolved over the years, and if there are any other examples in Southern California.
yeah, I worked for 3 or 4 years with Pepperdine University on their soccer fields until they switched over to a different type of grass and did that, and we were successful with that. Down a little further south, Rancho Mission Viejo, which is a homeowner association, and Ladera Ranch, which is another homeowner association. I worked for 3 years on 900,000 square feet of grass, including common areas and athletic fields at Rancho Mission Viejo, and instituted organic programs on their Bermuda grass fields and their Seashore Paspalum fields. And their board of directors, we worked every year for 3 years with them and did complete cost analysis. And at the end of the 3 years, the board voted and decided to continue the organic program, expand it to other areas of the property, of the community, and we're happy with the results. Ladera Ranch, I've just completed a 2-year engagement with them and designed an all organic renovation for an 11-acre sports field and park in the middle of the community. So everything that went into that renovation, meaning taking out all the old grass and doing all new, everything was organic from the very beginning. And that actually, I think the grass is actually going down next week. So 2 very successful examples of working with the challenges of Bermuda grass, high temperatures, spotty moisture availability, and watering with reclaimed water, which is also another thing that we have to deal with, and it's not the easiest thing in the world, but yeah, very successful examples on those 2 big ones. Also working in Tempe, Arizona, Tucson, Austin, Texas, Denton, Texas. So a lot of work being done in the warm season regions of the country.
Okay, we have a question from Barb Seeger, who says, I'm in a condo complex and I got them to stop putting fertilizers down for this year, but I need for them to continue not putting it down. What can I show them to convince them not to do it year after year?
When you say stop doing fertilizers, I assume you mean stop using the synthetic water soluble fertilizers. When we're dealing with grass, let me back up one step. Many plants out there in nature don't need anything from us. Nature in soils, healthy soils, gives the plant all that it needs. If we are trying to manage grass to a little bit of a higher expectation, grass needs more nitrogen than nature can generally provide on its own. So my focus with that is that I'm working with organic fertilizers to both build the soil biological life and then have that biological life impart the nutrition to the turf grass that the grass needs. And know that if I do that properly for, say, a 3-year transition period, which is what it would be in a condo complex like that, which I look as a commercial property, then I should be able to reduce fertilizers over time. And I might only do something like an introduction of a carbon source. Carbon feeds microbial life. So something like a humate or a humic acid can eventually take the place of fertilizer, because as long as I keep feeding the microbes, I don't need to have fertilizer as a crutch.
Great, thanks, Chip. Vivian Orlowski's is question. She wants to thank you for your informative talk. She wants to know an example in Massachusetts of public schools and public colleges where you've been able to help them transition to more natural lawns and or athletic fields.
Well, Marblehead has been all school grounds and all parks have been all organic since 2002. So we've got 21 years now of all the athletic fields and spaces in town have been managed non-chemically. Let's see, Wellesley, I worked with Wellesley back in the mid 2000s, and we did pilot projects and we showed it was successful. I addressed the Board of Selectmen in Wellesley and they adopted an organic policy. And to this day, they've continued to manage everything naturally to a pretty darn high level of expectation. So Cambridge has been, I've worked with them as a formal program, but they had already had 10 years of non-chemical management of all public space. They did it on their own. So they're 12 years now of no chemicals in Cambridge on all public space. So thinking, you have Wellesley, you have Watertown, you have Cambridge. It's this nice little pocket right there where, those spaces are being. Springfield out in Western Massachusetts, I worked with them. They manage everything organically. So once they get, learn how to do it and get confident with it and understand the protocols, all these examples have been very successful.
What are your thoughts about leaf blowers? From Kathy Button.
I think that at some points in the industry, they are needed for efficiency, but they should all be electric at this point. Gas leaf blowers, I'm not a big fan of leaf blowers. The noise is terrible. Landscape, leaf blowers put more emissions in the air. I forget the actual number, so I'm not going to quote it, but leaf blowers versus automobiles, and leaf blowers are horrible for their emissions and for their noise. But I've seen landscape contractors, when they do their spring cleanup, they put five men in a row. Each one has a leaf blower and they just walk back and forth across the property. I think all landscape contractors, all municipalities should be moving towards battery powered leaf blowers. And I support their use for spring and fall cleanups when they have a lot to do. But for the rest of the year, for the end of May, June, July, August, September, there really isn't a need to break out a leaf blower every time a landscape contractor, if grass clippings get on a walkway, then they have to be taught to pick up an old-fashioned broom and sweep it and not just break out a leaf blower. So I think they should, and it's happening all over the country. I mean, it's not a subject that is unique. It's happening everywhere. California, big restrictions. Westchester County, New York, big restrictions. And I support that.
Vivian Orlowski asks a question. What do you advise clients who have problems with aggressive invasive plants?
I guess first it would be defining, what the invasive is. And then it's looking at the individual invasive species and determining if manual eradication is an option, which it is in most situations that are relatively small. When you get into acres, when you start to talk about acres with invasive involvement, that's a different story. I've had success with, invasive bamboo and things like that, over a 2 or 3 year period of working with some of the alternative materials along with manual. I think the bigger discussion, and there's all kinds of research that shows if you do manual eradication, if you do chemical eradication, or you don't do too much, by the end of 10 or 15 years, everything comes out in the end, because chemicals don't ever, see, weed killers don't kill weeds. they temporarily suppress and make them go away. The other part of the discussion on invasives is that we have to redefine invasives, because with climate change, plants that were never here in our part of New England are now here, and they're going to stay. And other ones that are down in the mid-Atlantic are going to be moving up here as temperature changes. So we are going to see the palette of plant material that's out there in the wild gradually beginning to change, and it's going to bring things into our area that are not considered to be native to our area.
Thank you. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending the last of our organic landscaping series. I think it's been a great educational series this spring. I want to thank Chip Osborne and the community leaders for telling us about what's going on. And Chip, you've been wonderful. You talked 10 years ago, and I think there's been a lot of change in the 10 years since you spoke at the library in person pre-COVID. But I think that whenever you talk, I just could listen to you for hours. It's just wonderful.
Oh,
So
thank
you
you.
so much for talking to us today. And thank you everyone for attending the series. So thank you so much.
Thank you.